Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Josh with the Sports Energy and Consciousness Group, and this is another episode of Omni Athlete. So for this week's interview and episode, we actually went back and wanted to share with you guys an interview that Rich did with Barry Robbins, one of our founding members and a vice president of ITP International and a formerly nationally ranked athlete. He did this interview with Barry last spring, getting ready for our second ever Sports Energy and Consciousness Festival. We thought the interview was jam-packed with so much information, ranging from something as simple as team chemistry and the impact that has on athletics and being a competitive athlete, to topics as scientific and engaging as the vagus nerve and the endocrine system, and how our entire body, especially our gut, transmits information to the brain that we as athletes end up interpreting. So this week it's an oldie but a goodie. I hope you guys enjoy it, and next week we'll be back with another episode of Omni Athlete. Enjoy.
Hi again, Rich Walkoff with Barry Robbins. He is the vice president of the Integral Transformative Practice, a nonprofit that I guess looks to combine the mental, spiritual, and physical aspects of our being and our body, mind, spirit confluence. And Barry, today we're here at Media One in San Francisco talking about the upcoming festival for the wonderful organization SEC, Sports Energy and Consciousness. And you, my friend, great athlete in your day, take us back to the time when you first realized that what you did as an athlete transcended the physical, that it was a lot more mental and spiritual and psychological.
That's a good one, Rich. We'll go back into the Wayback Machine and look at that period of time, because I actually was involved in sports during my entire life, even when I was young, and very young, 6, 7 years old, for various reasons. This is also very interesting. I'll maybe talk a little bit more about that as time goes on. And it was really during the period of time in high school when I was playing baseball, basketball, and football. I was actually a three-sport guy. And the baseball component of it for me was the most interesting, because it signified the most unitive team concept approach that I had experienced at that time. So there were some moments during some of those games where the team chemistry kicked in, where 9 people became one, and we really did have that unitive collective experience. And so it went from self-transcendence to group transcendence. And it went from being egocentric about what I could do to be the best in me to how I could really be in service to this team, and what it really took for us to win on a collective basis. So the memories go back to high school, and then they shift a little bit because I got a scholarship to go to college at the University of Michigan, and I went there and didn't have a good experience. And this was really interesting too. And so it's our experience that really colors our memory of things and how we relate to things. So when I was a little boy, because of some issues, family of origin issues in my home, I lived 5 houses from the baseball field. And I found the baseball field to be my sanctuary, my refuge. It was my safe place. And so I went there for those reasons, and watched the big guys play baseball, play softball, play sports, and listened and learned through those guys. So what I realized as time went on in my sports career was some of the various reasons that people play sports. Is it for self-esteem? Is it because there's some issues that haven't been resolved, some needs that have been unmet? Or, as time goes on, can it simply be for the pure joy of playing this game? For playing the game itself, regardless of winning or losing. And that, for me, is a long-term path of practice. So these learning lessons when I was very young, when I was in college, were actually great teachers. They were practice partners for me. In college, I lost my love of the game, this real sense of the love and the joy of the game, through a very difficult 1 year and an experience on my team. and sort of dropped out for a while, didn't play sports, sort of isolated and withdrew. It was a pattern. Came out to California because the Beach Boys told me there was 2 girls for every guy, so I had to come out to California. Came out here and met some friends who were athletes. We still had that same athletic experience to share, and we started playing softball again, fast pitch softball. Reluctant at first, I got into it anyway, and I found that it really rekindled my love of the game, my truest, deepest love of the game. So in that sense, this sport and my athletic endeavors were a real life learning experience. And through sport, I really learned about the value of playing, of competition, of empowerment, and what those terms really mean.
So I guess there was a paradigm shift, because if I can get you to expand a little bit about your bad experience at Michigan, did you run into the old school view of, you tough it out, win at all cost, and cutthroat approach to the competition, where winning wasn't the only thing, winning wasn't everything, it was the only thing, versus the camaraderie, the team kind of the sum of the parts exceeding the whole that you experienced in your earlier days, that you were almost ahead of your time in a way.
Yeah. Well, truth be told, it was more of a bias towards certain kind of players that came from the coach. And so he chose his favorites based on ethnicity, religion, race. And so that translated to me. And when I really realized that, when that sunk in, it was a tremendous shock, because I was all about equality, egalitarian, and hey, if you perform well, if you play well, you earn your spot. So it was a shock in that sense, and it was interesting because a lot of the guys that I played with on my freshman team subsequently went on to have major league careers, and in fact Hall of Fame careers, for some of the very same reasons. So, I'm reminded of the Masters this last weekend and Sergio Garcia, because Sergio Garcia has a reputation. And here he was in the final round of the Masters, ahead, and the same sort of thing happened, this choking reputation that he has, and he lost the lead. But somehow he found himself and actually came back, tied, and then won in a sudden death playoff. So this learning lesson at college was to remember to come back, to always recollect that you can have a bad experience, but it's how we handle it that's most important. And for little kids out there who have difficult experiences, who don't have the framework, the family, the worldview, the history to be able to work through this, sport does serve as these tremendous life lessons, and it shows us, one, the value of mentorship, that coaches are, next to parents and teachers, the most major influence in a young child's experience of growing up. So these things are really important. And for me, this actually gave me a chance to experience the hit as a gift, because hits can be gifts. It just depends on how we look at them. It was a tremendous hit for me not to be able to play, even though by merit I felt I deserved it, but to learn from it and then withdraw. I withdrew a little bit, came out here to California, and got back involved. So it was sort of an opportunity to rejuvenate myself and my love and joy of sports. So I didn't revert to the same old patterns and the self-esteem issues, but I found this new way, and in fact played fast pitch softball for 3 decades, had an incredible time during that period of time. And in fact, when I discovered ITP and got involved in integral transformative practice, those were the last few years of my fast pitch softball career. I was a nationally ranked athlete, a first team All-American. And those last years and those first years of ITP were the best years that I ever experienced on a field and off the field. So I want to say that the integration, the combination of ITP, this integral practice, and how it applied and adapted directly into sports and my pitching, made a huge difference and elevated a game that I love to play, and most importantly, made me a better person.
You know that acronym for FAIL is first attempt in learning? I guess in many ways, that detour probably routed you into a better path, ultimately in the long run, if you take it the right way. So right. For your experience as a fast pitch softball guy at the elite level, talk about some of the mental, psychological, unconscious aspects of the mindful athlete that brought you to the top of your game.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because I had an early interest in yoga and meditation for some 35, 40 years now. And so I brought those practices into my fast pitch athletic career at a time when most of my teammates were very different than me. Their backgrounds were different. And so for some of these guys to sit there and watch me meditate, engage in contemplative practice, was just a very strange, weird, woo-woo or out there thing. And I met that resistance along the way. What happened is that when I pitched and I was mindful in the moment, this Japanese term is Zenshin, moment-to-moment awareness, the direct experience of reality in the moment, and played so well. A lot of these teammates came up to me and said, "What about that meditation stuff, man? Can you teach me some of that stuff?" So there was a translation from my own practice that had an effect on my teammates and on the whole team. And so I tried to be subtle about it. I wasn't preaching, but I will tell you, and I'd like to share with you, one of my most memorable sports experience. This is a remarkable experience. And I want to put it in context because right now there's a lot of popularity around the flow state, being in the zone, which is a part of this remarkable elevated level of consciousness that people can attain. Not just through sports. Sports is a portal. There's thousands of ways to attain this very wonderful flow state. But in pitching, I did experience it over and over and over again. It was a combination of my physical activity, warming up before the game, getting highly aerobic, stretching, an emotional practice that I used, mental training as well. So it was integral. So when I pitched, there were those moments when I absolutely felt like I was there, in the very present moment when anything is possible. So the real story, though, that I want to tell about this is when we went to a tournament. Every year we went to the national tournament. And it was a combination of probably somewhere between 80 and 120 teams from all over the country. All of them were their very top of their game, and the thing that was interesting was because they came from all over the country, there was no seeding. So you could play the best team in the tournament on the first day and lose, and you could get knocked out of the tournament very quickly because you either continued to win until you got to the finals, or if you lost 2 games, you were out. So we made it to the finals that year. And in the finals, the coach came up to me and said, I'm not going to start you this year. I want you to go out on the sidelines and just warm up with your catcher because I'll probably bring you in later on. So we did that. We walked down the sidelines. We warmed up. We were throwing the ball back and forth together, and he caught me all year. And at one point, he said, "Time out, I want to talk to you." Now, he was very different than I was. I came from an urban area, a very progressive area here in the San Francisco Bay Area with very liberal leanings and interesting thinking. My catcher grew up in the Central Valley. He drove a Harley. He chewed tobacco. We smoked cigarettes. He was very religious, very fundamental. So on a certain level, you could say we were coming from different worlds. So he called timeout, walked up to me, and he was spitting tobacco, and he just looked at me and says, I just want to tell you that all year long you've been talking to me about subtle energy and lines of energy and auras and connection. He said, quite frankly, I still have no idea what the hell you're talking about. But keep on doing it because it's really working well. So that was a confirmation of this remarkable flow state that passed through the two of us. Because the stuff you hear about flow right now typically deals with an individual being in the flow, in the zone. But when you get into it collectively, you and another person, like you and I right now, or an entire team, it's infectious. And so what was happening between me and this catcher spread to the entire team. And they knew that we were dialed in, we were locked in. It wasn't me, it was us. And sometimes you create a third entity. There's me, there's you, and then there's a third entity, which is you and me. This catcher was completely dialed into me, and I was into him. He knew every pitch I wanted to throw. He knew where I wanted to put it. We both had this really interesting ability to read the batter energetically and know what he wanted. And what happened between us was extraordinary. It's the holy grail, one of the holy grails of sport, of getting into that flow state, that zone, together. And so he didn't have the language for it, Rich. He didn't have the worldview, the ideology, but he had the direct experience. And so what he had to say to me was such an incredible compliment that it went beyond my own experience of being into the zone to really showing and demonstrating that anyone can pick up this magic when you're in this field together that is so compelling, so powerful. And that it occurred to us in the national tournament, and that day it happened many times over, but that was sort of an unknown and unspoken area. You didn't talk about those things. They sort of stayed in the locker room, if ever even discussed. So just to bring it out and have this discussion about it was a connection and a recognition of our bond together, that we were united. We were connected. We were one person, living, breathing, thinking entity. And teammates remarked on it too. Subtle asides, yeah, you guys are really on there. And the interesting thing about your teammates is when you're in that place and they know that you're going to put a ball in the exact location where the catcher's holding his target, they position themselves accordingly. And so it makes life a lot easier for them. So there was this really interesting, these interesting periods of time when the entire team was in this flow state. And, you know, we talk about that at the sports festival with respect to team chemistry. That's amazing. And then what happens is, like consciousness itself, which expands like ripples in a pond, when team chemistry occurs, it expands out into an entire stadium. And I think that's one of the most galvanizing things of all sporting events is when you're at a stadium and you know that there's magic occurring on that field. So not only does the team know it, but the fans are part of it as well, and they can experience it. And that's one of the thrills of the sport.
And that synergy is palpable. So get back to the Sports, Energy, and Consciousness Festival, which is going to be sharing the insights, the wisdom, the knowledge about how to get there, how to stay there, and just talk a little bit more about what you learned last year, what you hope to see this upcoming June.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so last year was our first one, and we had a remarkably good turnout. We had some rather amazing speakers. Michael Murphy was there. Pete Carroll joined us, probably one of the most powerful inspirational speakers that I've heard. And our three main themes at the event was to talk about sport as a transformative practice. That was number one, a transformative practice, which is, you know, a series of exercises and practices that are coherent and connected that produce a positive effect for a group or an individual. That's a term that Michael Murphy coined for transformative practice. So we would like to say that sport is a transformative practice. That's the first theme. But it's more than sport. It's athleticism. It's exercise. It's any form of movement. It's yoga, dance, walking. So our festival is the umbrella for all of that. So that's the first part of it, is to people to get the worldviews and the philosophies of this evolving sort of groundbreaking work in this body of sports, which is developed over decades. The second part of it is the integral in sports, which is the integration, the healthy integration of body, mind, heart, and soul. So that reaching our true potential, our peak performance, comes not in developing just one area to the exclusion of another, but combining physical practices, emotional practices, mental practices, and then the spirit, the soul. So it's the integration, or the whole, that's greater than the sum of the parts. So that's something that we really emphasize at the festival. And these practices that we have translate into all of these areas of life.
So often people look at sports separate from the human experience or my work or my fun with friends or whatnot, and not realizing its direct connection or integral part of living and life, and how it has an application far beyond the ball field or the court or the arena. Just talk a little bit about that aspect of things.
Well, that's the ROI, the return on investment, that I think any good teaching program, festival, event has to offer, which is how does it translate into my everyday life? Is everybody that's going to come to our festival a professional athlete or even a trainer or a coach? No. And it doesn't matter, because on a certain level, sports is one of the great metaphors. It's the great Western metaphor for life. And in fact, billions of people throughout the world either watch or participate in sports and athletics. So as it turns out, in our worldview, it's one of the very potent mediums to reach out and send a positive message to billions of people. And then can we take that message and have people customize it and personalize it to their everyday life? How does it translate into their home? For example, training in sports primarily was done on a sort of a right brain basis, Rich, in that people really spend a lot of time learning the technical aspects of sport, which is good for a basic foundation, for a fundamental understanding of sports. You've got to get the techniques down. But to use the piano playing metaphor, you got to learn the keys, you got to learn the notes, but if you want to really go far out, you take that with the intuitive side and you play jazz. So this is something that we do at the festival, where we're offering people multiple worldviews and philosophies about sports as it translates into life, but then highly experiential practices, because it's the direct experience for me that really makes the difference. And that's how things are transmitted, not through a teleseminar, not necessarily through reading written material, but the actual relationship in the moment where the flow state occurs, where you can engage in experiential practices. And then finally, the extraordinary that sports has to offer and reveal to us. Because when we see something remarkable that happens in the field of play that's never happened before, it galvanizes the viewing public, because what you're seeing is literally the evolution of mankind on a playing field, something that's never done before. And you see that in most recent years there's a huge proliferation of extreme sports. They've just taken off. People are doing these gravity-defying things that have never even been done. These sports are only 2 or 3 years old just to start off with in some cases. So the extraordinary reveals itself. It's our ability to evolve and adapt and do things that literally are the metaphor for reaching for the stars as we become the stars themselves. Now, that's all great and it's esoteric, but the issue is, so how do we take that home? What's the return on investment? What's the real bang for the buck here? So I'll just say a little bit about the emotional component of this, because, as I said, the technical training is great. But what about emotions? How do we deal with emotions? How do we develop emotional resiliency or emotional stability in our lives? How can we look at emotions as a transformative practice? Because for many times, they can be used against us. Very few of us have taken Emotions 101, where we've learned how to share and express our feelings. You don't get that unless you have a very special family. It's not taught in school. It's not even taught in society. But, for example, emotions are incredibly powerful. And in this new emerging world of both science and sports, where there's new science now that shows that we can literally regenerate our brain and our body through powerful emotions, through powerful memories, we literally can give birth to a new body. And in fact, when you see people train for a specific event and reshape their body, you're seeing the transformation of the flesh right in front of your eyes. So for emotions, when we look at emotions as an example, one of the things that is being taught is developing an understanding of the multiple brains in our body, the multiple intelligences that we have in our body. Now, most of us relate to intelligence as being up here in our cognitive brain, but the body has other brains. The body has, for example, a brain down here in the hara, in your belly, your gut. You hear people say, I have a gut feeling about that, a gut sense, sixth sense. So this is your enteric nervous system. And there's a whole new world now called neurogastroenterology, which is the science of your enteric nervous system. Now, when we were born, both of these areas were joined together in the fetus. We actually shared embryonic tissue between the enteric nervous system and your cranial brain. And then as the fetus unfolded and grew and developed, the brains separated. They were connected by this longest running nerve in the body, the vagus nerve. And information, as it turns out, is translated over 90% of the time from this area of the body, the belly, the enteric nervous system, your core, your center, going up to your brain. So we actually experience things first, right here in the body. Our body is the teacher. And then, milliseconds later, it hits our brain and we try and figure it out. The direct experience is right here. So if we're going to train into emotional stability and resilience, we actually have to work with these other parts of our body. And that's why a lot of these practices are somatic practices, they're mind-body practices. Now, I teach something that's called core centering. It comes from ITP, it comes from Aikido, it comes from some of the Eastern martial arts where you use your core, your hara, as the center. Not only as the fulcrum of the body, the place where the body is most balanced and centered, but also as your emotional center. So how do you ground yourself when you're having an emotional issue? Or do you go into a fight or flight mode and actually just flood out and lose it, snap out? What's your pattern and what's your practice? So when we teach emotional resiliency and emotional stability, it goes right here into this enteric nervous system, into your hara. As it turns out, there's literally billions of nerve cells and nerve endings in this part of your body. And this goes into a new form of intelligence that is being recognized and realized, which is sensitivity. So not just cranial intelligence, but actual wisdom right here in the body, so that you can feel into something. You'll hear people say, I really did have a gut feeling about that. And when you make a decision, a lot of times now people say, it feels right, or it doesn't feel right. So this is emotional intelligence, and this is a new emergent intelligence, and I'd like to say that when we look at the evolution of the species, right now we're Homo sapiens sapien, but perhaps we become a more feeling, more sensuous, more sensing being, where we listen down here to the wisdom of the body and move into this evolving species, Homo sapiens sentient.
So often you hear athletes at the highest level say, boy, I was out of my mind, I didn't realize this, that, or the other, and I performed at an amazing level.
Yeah.
Which kind of parallels your thinking about getting the mind out of the way and be more intrinsic in your awareness and your actions. And again, when you see a Usain Bolt achieve things that no man has ever achieved, running faster than anybody ever, the highest form of human expression, I think that's what's so compelling and captivating for observers of his craft and his art. But what about the everyman? What about the weekend warrior, the recreational athlete who is interested in this festival, but he's far from a world-class athlete, and he doesn't have any clue about the things that you're talking about or hearing it for the first time?
Yeah, good one. And in fact, most of the people that come are not world-class athletes or coaches. They are everyday or recreational athletes, or people who exercise, or people who move or walk. And for many of those people, and that includes myself, we're interested in betterment. We're interested in improvement. It's the natural human tendency to want to grow and evolve. And so how do you do that physically? Or how do you do that emotionally? And combine that in your practice. You and I played tennis together. So some of these practices have direct experience on peak performance, on enhancing our game. And then, even beyond that, it's the experience of the game itself. It's the joy of the game. Is it about winning or losing? Is it about competing in a different way? So that's one takeaway, because for most of us, we look at, I'm going to use two terms, competition and power. So competition in the West, the way it's normally related to, is beating somebody, getting over on them. I win, you lose. That's competition. And you see it in sports a lot. Winning is everything. Well, is it? Maybe on a professional level when money's involved and your livelihood is involved. But for the everyday athlete, what is really important? So I'm not going to say what's necessarily really important, because it's up to each one of us to decide. But at the festival, we're giving an opportunity for people to look into that through that lens, to really reframe what their experience means to them. So competition, for example, the true Latin derivative of the word competition is competere, and what that means is to strive together, to strive together. So for us at SEC, what we look at is this is an ability through sports, but that translates into life, to make each other better, to bring out the best in each other. The best game that I ever pitched, I lost, 1-0. It was the best game I ever pitched, and it was a fluke, and I lost. But I felt better about that game than most of the games I can remember. In fact, this is the one that sticks in my memory. And I knew that I had done everything I could, played as well as I could, and I felt so good about that game, more than any of the other wins. So competition can take on a different meaning. Can we make each other better? And you watch that in sports, where some of the teams that I really respect say, hey, it's about my teammates, it's about our chemistry. They're the ones that elevate me. The second part of this is power. So power is something that's commonly used and misused here in the West. What does it really mean to have power? Does it mean power over somebody else, to power through something? Well, again, when we go back to the true origins of these words, the Latin verb is empowerza, which means empower, to empower. So there's a frame of looking at this where we're really empowering ourselves and empowering others. What? Well, perhaps it's to be our highest, our greatest, the best of ourselves that we can be. And perhaps through the joy of experiencing a sport, an activity, life, that takes on a truer meaning than how well we do, that reaching our goals, that it's being on this path of life and practice that perhaps has so much value. So if you remember this time that Juan Marichal pitched this marathon game, he won the game 1-0, but he pitched 16 or so innings. And the impetus for him to do that, it was 2 games, was the fact that if the other guy was going to throw this many innings, he was going to do it. So it's a perfect example, Rich, of a situation where it transcended just the physicality of Juan Marichal. I mean, technically speaking, and in this day and age, he would have been lifted in the 8th inning. There would have been 6 relievers that were in there already. But it wasn't just about his physical nature. It was about his mental frame and his emotional frame. He wanted to compete, and this other person, in his own way, was bringing the best out of Juan Marichal. Now, there's something else I want to mention, too, because in the emotional development of an athlete or a person, and this is a take-home for anybody who comes to this festival, how do we train into the zone? How do we train into our emotions? Well, for a lot of people, they have this magic moment. Something happens. It comes through them. You'll hear athletes say this. I don't know, it's just coming through me. It could be religious. It could be Jesus. I want to thank God, the Lord. But they're recognizing that something higher, a higher power, is coming through them, that they are a vessel. That's a huge shift in consciousness for us to understand, not just in sports, but in our life when things happen. So that's one area where we can really look at and say, well, now how does our emotions play into this? How can we also train into the zone? Can we train into the zone? Because for many people, they say, I don't know how to do this. It just happened to me. So at this festival, we're going to be able to offer people experiential practices that will allow them at will to get into this flow state, to get into this unitive state. And in fact, we also want to recognize that sport is a spiritual practice, because the things that athletes are experiencing, this high level of awareness, the flow state, is no different than people in a spirituality community experiencing a satori state. or a samadhi state. It's a high level of enlightenment. That's what a satori state means. A brief excursion into an enlightened state. They're one and the same. These two areas are drinking from the same well. That sport is a spiritual practice, that you're having a spiritual experience when you're on the playing field and something remarkable happens. The other thing I want to mention is that the emotional side of this is very interesting. Remember John McEnroe. Now, John McEnroe, when he played tennis, and even Jimmy Connors, they had an edge to them. They would get mad. They would get upset. There would be a line call. The judge would say something, and they would get mad, go off. Sometimes they were reprimanded for being too loud. But a lot of times when you watch McEnroe, he was talking to himself because he was upset over a play that he didn't or didn't make. He was one of the very interesting early on exemplars of somebody who trained anger into higher performance, into peak performance. He actually used anger to make himself better. Most people in an angry state deactivate their performance centers. They decrease their ability. Like I remember Ilie Nastase during that period of time was also probably one of the most gifted athletes physically that I ever seen on a tennis court. He would be up 6-3 or 5-3. He'd be up 2 games or 2 sets to none, and all of a sudden something would go wrong. A line call, some nominal thing, and he would go down the tubes because his emotional development was such that he was so fragile and so sensitive that he couldn't do what John McEnroe did. Now you take a guy like Steph Curry, who has both the emotional chops and background and also this incredible ability and work ethic. He is practiced at it. And you see the highest reaches of what an athlete can do. Because every night when you watch him walk out on that floor, 2 or 3 extraordinary things that have never happened before on a basketball court occur regularly. So training into emotions for many of us are hugely significant. It's a sort of an untouched area. It's a new world for a lot of us, sensitive, a little tender. But in the same way that you can train at will into a flow state, you can train your emotions and be who you want to be.
I love your comment. You said energy training as a gateway to the extraordinary.
Yeah. So it's sports, energy, and consciousness, and the energetic part of it and the consciousness part of it are integral and interwoven through sports to create some kind of really elevated effect. And the energetics of sports are very interesting because in the past, people look at them as sort of a woo-woo out there stuff. But now, through science, we're going to have science, really cool science at this festival, science is validating some of these esoteric wisdom traditions. So, for example, our ability to have deja vu experiences, sixth sense, gut feelings, clairsentience, clairvoyance, precognitive experiences. I knew this was going to happen. Now, in everyday life, I knew you were going to call me. The phone rings. I knew you were going to call me. I could just feel it, visualize it. So in sports, it's happening all the time, but people don't have the language for it. So we want to say it's hidden in plain sight. It's happening right there in front of you. And can we have a language? Can we have a discussion about this? And how does that translate into everyday life? Again, can you take this into your business meeting? Can you create a flow state with a group of people while you're talking about a business project? Or into medicine or arts? In any walk of life, because it all has direct translations. So again, the more integral we are in our training, the more we have an opportunity to engage in the Greek term. It's called antikoluthia. It means the mutual entailment of the virtues. And what it's saying is development in one area impacts development in another area, and the next, and the next, and the next. So there's this wonderful correlation between aerobic training and cognitive development. That as we train aerobically, it enhances our intellectual levels. There's fantastic scientific studies about this. And also, there's wonderful material about strength training and its ability to develop our emotional well-being, that the two of them are connected and related to each other. So when we talk about antikoluthia, the mutual entailment of the virtues, the integral, what we're talking about is cross-training. Here in the West, we look at it, this is cross-training. Oh yeah, okay, I got it. Okay, to develop emotionally, it translates intellectually, it translates spiritually, it translates physically. They're all interrelated, and the idea is to have them all happening at one time. The simultaneous embrace of body, mind, heart, and soul. And that's one of the things that we teach at the festival.
Very cool. Like telomeres, the brain neurons that grow through enhanced physical activity. There used to be a belief, the dumb jock versus the intellectual or the bookworm. Now we now know that by enhancing your physicality, you're becoming smarter. You're actually creating more brain cells. You're enhancing your brain cell development.
Yeah.
So which goes right in line with what you're saying.
Yeah.
How about for the parent, the coach, the teacher, for the youngins, the ones who are the blank slate, open book, ready to absorb anything? What will the festival provide for those who want to help young kids who, if they get on the right path now, they can be the next stars of tomorrow or in whatever field they choose?
Yeah. So those young kids is where the real opportunities lie, because as you say, it's a blank slate, and they're most impacted by their parents, their teachers, their mentors. And so for us, it's about being in service to this whole group of people, this wonderful emerging class of young people who probably have more openness and more receptivity. So it's a service and a responsibility. And we have had young kids come to the event last year who got it. One of the reasons, Rich, is because a lot of the learning is through the body. It's the experiential, in the moment, direct realization of teaching. And so kids get it in their body. They don't have as many developed, I want to say, cultural filters. And so they get the immediate learning in their body. Your body is your teacher, and it tells you right away what is occurring in front of you. It's filtered through your brain, and it's combined with your memories of things, and that creates certain emotions and certain responses. So for young kids, it's a huge opportunity for parents to come and learn and share and transmit to their kids, or to bring their kids. And from our view, may all of us teach them well, because all of us have a collective responsibility to make each other better, to take care of each other, to be generous with each other, to be compassionate. And so part of this training, again, through sports, which is this fantastic, wonderful field where kids can really learn, will hopefully aid parents, coaches, and teachers in dealing with their kids and the kids themselves. Another thing about the sports festival that we're interested in doing is to create an environment, a real rich environment, the very fertile grounds where something can arise. So one of the things we're going to do at the sports festival is we're going to have a scientific field experiment where we're going to measure chemistry in the entire audience. So we'll have people be able to have the direct experience of that. Now I want to say that there's certain venues, Rich, in life where people go for various reasons. One of them is to have these unitive, collective, at-one experiences. And one of those venues are religious venues. They're churches and synagogues and mosques. They're places that hold a collection of individuals that are there through religion to experience something very higher that passes through and transcends into them. So that's one venue, and people go there selectively for that reason. Another is sports. The stadiums, the arenas, the outdoor pavilions and amphitheaters that we've constructed do the same thing. They allow people to go and have a religious experience, but it's a spiritual experience by watching sport, where they see things that are extraordinary, that, again, have never happened before. That's the third venue, I should say. But that's the second. The third venue is music. Theaters, amphitheaters, where people go to listen. And why? To be taken into the raptures of their own worlds through music. Symphonies, classical music, definitely rock and roll. That was my upbringing and my background. So again, people are going to venues, and through these different portals, they're having similar experiences. So again, sports is one of those beautiful mediums that give us a message that translates into our everyday life. Another area where we feel that people can really benefit by coming to the sports festival is in developing their own inner game. So the term that we use is interiority. Because a lot of times what we do is we gauge or measure ourselves through someone else. We bounce off of somebody else, their personality, their characteristics, who they are. But this practice is going inside. It's listening deeply to what's true inside your body, and also exploring your own inner worlds. Now, another thing that's really been emergent is this whole concept of mindfulness. It's very popular now among a lot of people, certain areas of the country, certainly out here on the West Coast. And for me, mindfulness is under the umbrella of contemplative practice. Mindfulness, and under that umbrella you also have meditation practices and other things where contemplation really gives rise to something else. For example, reverie, having those moments where something remarkable appears to you a vision, not too far away from daydreaming. But all these, again, under this umbrella of contemplative practice. So how do we take the inner worlds of contemplative practice and bring them into everyday life? How do we become a little more quiet and still? How do we actually quiet the monkey mind that we have, where we have thousands of thoughts that are repeating over and over and over again? How do we get to stillness, and how do we actually live inside those thoughts? Now, there's another term I'd like to use, which is called the monkey heart. Thousands and thousands and thousands of emotions that we experience on an ongoing basis. It sort of feels sometimes with me that I'm on the roller coaster of both the mind and the heart, the thoughts and the emotions. And so through these practices, we can get a little more solid and grounded and centered, and actually find the space between all these thoughts and the space between all these emotions to where our really true self is at, the true being, the real essence of who we are. And when you get to these moments in time, when you're in the flow state, when you're in that very special moment, that's when magic occurs, and that's where anything can happen, because you are directly in the moment and anything can arise. When we were at Mayacamas Ranch, hosted by Dave Levy, this is a shining example of where team chemistry really occurred. There was a collection of a remarkable group of people. It was a summit meeting of many of the people who came to the last year's festival, who found this tremendous influence and interest in this work that we're doing. So Dave Levy, through his generosity, convened us at Mayacamas Ranch up in Calistoga, up in Napa Valley. And what Dave provided was the very essence of what he's all about: generosity and convening and community. And I think it's important for all of us to understand, whether we consciously realize it or not, that we all live and move in worlds of communities. And these are, some of them are overlapping circles of communities. Our family is a community. Our work area is a community. Our play in our lives. Every part of our life, unless we're single-handed sailors and want to be completely isolated and alone, are engaged in communities. So for us to embrace conscious community, to understand what it's all about, and also the power, the empowerment of being in a community and what it can do to the individual and to the collective, is something to behold. That obviously is true in sports. And what happened at Mayacamas, and Rich Walkoff, you were there along with a number of others, is a shining example of that. And so what Dave is doing as a benefactor for this festival is helping us create this nurturing, rich environment, and he's really helping us till and fertilize the soil to give growth to many things.